Hi, this is Reg Athwal and welcome to our channel. Thanks for coming back to watch another episode today. I've got a fantastic lady, great entrepreneur, where we're going to be going into our next gen entrepreneur show and another episode of how you can become a great entrepreneur, look at the future, as well as viewers who could be next gen members of family businesses. So my guest today is a serial entrepreneur. She's, as you can see from the screenshot here, being on Forbes front page for me is a huge achievement, and this was achieved as being part of being featured on the front cover as part of Forbes Africa before the age of 30. And my guest today, Rapelang Rabana, was selected also as a Fast Company Maverick, named Entrepreneur for the World by the World Entrepreneurship Forum, and also selected as a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. And Rapelang is an international admired technology entrepreneur. She built her first startup straight out of university to then becoming this chief digital officer at a South African, or in fact, actually South Africa's largest IT company. And from there, she's really amassed 15 years of experience now building tech enterprises. She's the current founder of Rekindle Learning, and I'm going to ask her questions later on about what this company does. But in summary, I've been told it's a learning tech startup which combines proven learning principles and technology to improve learning outcomes. She's also a thought leader, and she's an advisor on digital innovation and sits on many boards, including the World Summit Awards in Austria, Standard Chartered Bank Education Trust in Botswana, Imagine Worldwide in the USA, Global Future Council on Entrepreneurship, and also part of the World Economic Forum. So fantastic credentials. She's also a keynote speaker. I know that she's got 5 or 6 excellent topics that she speaks on a regular basis at major conferences, and I'm going to ask her some questions about that too. So without further ado, Rapelang, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And you're the second female entrepreneur I've had on my channel, so that means a lot to me. And awesome. So welcome from South Africa.
Thank you so much, Reg. It's really great to be part of your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I'm gonna get straight onto a hot topic. I need to ask you this opinion. I was doing some research earlier and going through the web, and I noticed that one of the latest reports that came out was around the Fortune 500 companies. And when it comes to the Fortune 500 companies, there is only currently 37 women. Okay,
yeah,
that's it. 37 women out of 500 companies. Can you imagine? That makes up 7.4% of the Fortune 500 CEOs.
Yeah.
And I was shocked when I saw that. And to go to another level, I know it's a hot topic around the world right now with some of the things that are going on in America and around the world, which is, you know, being a woman of color, being someone from South America or maybe Africa, Middle East or Asia, how many people of color are in leadership roles? And I realized out of the 37, there is no black female CEO.
Wow.
There was one for Bath and Beyond, but she's no longer in that position. And I'm shocked with this stat. What's your thoughts on what is going on here? And what's your journey been like as an entrepreneur and being in a leadership role as a female?
Sure. There's so many complexities to this conversation, Reg. And especially now with the Black Lives Matter sort of campaign and trends going out, I think it really causes us to reflect quite a bit on this. And I would say that the reason I think I'm lucky, or I've managed to navigate my way through this, really starts in my own childhood. I was raised by very egalitarian parents. I had 2 brothers. We all had to cook and clean. We all had to do maths and science, and there was no excuse to not be able to do any of those things. For as long as you had a mind, a mouth, 2 hands and 2 feet, everything had to be done. So, and on top of that, you know, my mother was the pioneer in my family. She graduated with an electrical engineering degree and a specialization in aviation in the late 70s, 80s. So she was a remarkable woman in herself, and she was the only woman in her high school when the whole of her high school class, she was the only woman in her class. So for me, I felt that when they raised me, I never knew that I was a girl and therefore I was at a disadvantage. It was only something I started to observe and learn in my 20s post-university, that, oh, this is sometimes seen as a drawback. And I had to reflect and wonder why I didn't feel it. In my constitution, in my sense of self, I never believed that I don't deserve to be somewhere, that I don't have a right to be here, that I don't have a right to speak. And because of that, the world around me affirmed that more and more. So I was actually the worst example to understand the dynamics, of that a number of women face, where I think if you didn't grow up in it, if it wasn't ingrained in your constitution, you may need that further support to actually be able to step out and trust your place in the world. So I would say, hands down, my main advantage is my upbringing. There's no doubt about it.
Can I ask you, with the upbringing, when it comes to entrepreneurship, do you feel that was there as well? Was, who influenced you there of becoming an entrepreneur, becoming a businesswoman? Where did that come from?
Sure. It wasn't directly influenced. For most of my upbringing, my parents were public servants working in Botswana, and it was only when we moved to South Africa that they started working on their own businesses. And I can't say that I was entrepreneurial as a child either. I definitely didn't do any sales, cake sales or anything very well like that. But for me, the journey to entrepreneurship really started with more sort of self-reflection and trying to figure out what exactly I was going to sort of do in this world. And I remember my first sort of conscious conversation with myself. I must have been about 13 years old in a high school class. I wasn't very good at geography, so I wasn't listening very well. And I remember being so bored that I would look into the sunlight, trying to blind my eyes because I was so bored and hoping this class would finish. And it was in one of those moments where I suddenly started talking to myself. I was like, Rapelang, what are you doing? And what is this life thing going to be for you? Are you just going to keep, I felt like I'd played systems the whole of primary school, the whole of high school. And then I was told there's going to be something called university and something called corporate. And I suddenly felt suffocated and wondered, when do I actually start making my own decisions? When do I start living my life? And when do I stop playing the systems as such? And I stayed close to that question, I would say, right up until, I was 21, 22, coming out of university, where I already sort of knew by the end of high school that I'm tired of playing the system. I just couldn't articulate it yet. I tried to take a gap year, but my parents, in Black culture, these are not things you do. You've got to go and study.
When you say the system, can I ask you, when you say the system, Rapelang, what do you mean by the system?
By the system, I mean the default way of living, the things that we're sort of born into, that we are born into a construct or a structure that says you go to primary school for 7 or 8 years. And you get to the peak of that primary school. And then next year, you're a year older, but now you're at the bottom of another system. And I just felt so confused. When and I'm told what I need to study, the things I have to spend my time and attention on and my energy on are determined by things I don't understand and people I probably will never meet. And then after that, I was required to join another system called university.
So were you a bit of a rebel? Would you say there was a bit of a rebel in you?
I think it was a bit of a rebel in me, though I know how to toe the line. I did very well in school and I did very well in systems. Yeah. But by the end of university, I had to say to my parents, this is the last time I am doing what you have asked me to do. This is the end. I'm not going to go into corporate. I'm not going to go and do those things. I believe I've done everything that you needed me to do as a good child, but I'm done. My brain can't take it anymore. And I just need to figure out this life for myself, kind of thing.
So
and it was that yearning.
Can I ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because there's so many questions I want to ask you.
Sure.
So what happened then when you were at university and did your first startup come along? What's the story there?
But sure. So by the last 6 months of university, I was crystal clear that I can't go into corporate. And I started persuading my parents and things that I needed to do this. And luckily, there were a couple of classmates in my computer science class who were also desperate not to get a job and were battling to figure out what are we going to do next year so that we don't get shouted at home and we remain respectable young professionals in a way. And we started chatting and getting together. And eventually we thought, let's start a business. We can finally work on the stuff that we think is important and the stuff we want to commit our time to. And that was a very big part of the thinking for me. I wanted to finally decide how I spent my attention and what I gave my time to. And I was tired of having to surrender that as I had for the last 22 years of my life. And this group of us, 3 of us, started meeting and we decided, okay, so what is this business going to be about? And we thought and we're like, look, as students, we never had enough money to make phone calls, especially off your mobile phone. They were really too expensive. And we believed that with the growth of 3G and Wi-Fi and smartphones, one shouldn't have to get airtime. One should be able to make calls on Bluetooth or Wi-Fi and those things. And bear in mind that even though there was Skype back in the day, none of us had personal computers and we weren't sitting at a computer making calls. For us as a mobile first generation, we needed to have that voice over IP calling on our mobile phones. And that didn't exist back then in 2005. So that's the business we then decided to start. We called that Yego. We graduated at the end of December 2005 and agreed to meet back in the middle of Jan or 16th of Jan of 2006. And by sheer miracle, we all came back at the agreed date and we started thinking, all right, now how do we build this business?
So can I ask you a couple of things there around that? Because I think there's some really good insights, which is, and if someone's watching this now, either as a family business owner, thinking of their next generation, who could be incubating or launching new startups, or it could be someone watching this thinking, wow, I want to be, just like Rapelang, I want to be a first generation entrepreneur. There's a few things there. You definitely established a need, okay, which I like. You also had pretty much, whether it's by accident or intentionally, had a dream team.
Yes.
So what do you, could you expand on those things if you were doing that all over again today, with your experience now, what would you do differently and what would be some of the steps in launching a business and getting it right?
Sure. Great. So very good questions there. And solving that need is sort of the most critical thing. And I would say with every business I've done, I've looked back at my own life experience and tackled a problem that I personally understood and knew, because that allows you to bring your whole life experience to the table to figure out an innovative way to do it. And coming out of university, we did have, all of us were young and highly skilled computer scientists. And that allowed us to do something very important. We didn't have to pay a company or a consultant to build a software product for us or do anything for us. We also had a business management background. So we could do everything from registering the business to setting up the business processes to developing the software. And I say that because a lot of young people who want to get into tech feel that I have to get money to pay a developer to come and do this for me, which is actually the wrong way of thinking about it. You need to go into a business with the right team, that you have your core skills in the founding team to get going. Otherwise, it's going to cost you a huge fortune to actually get the business going, which isn't what you need to do at that point.
So is it okay with that approach to, are you talking the typical tech startup where, you go, okay, there's 3 of us or 4 of us or 5 of us, and then is it as simple as, you know, we're all going to have equal equity, or was there one brainchild who came up with the concept and idea, brought the others together and said, okay, I'm going to have majority and I'll give you all shares in the company? What's the typical model?
Oh, those dynamics. Very, very interesting dynamics. I don't believe that the idea is worth anything. So I don't think the person that comes up with the ideas should suddenly have a bigger share of at all. The share allocations or equity should be really allocated based on who's going to allocate that time and energy and full-time focus. And at the beginning of a startup, there is no value. So it must be even according to the 3 founders that come in. And whoever came up with the idea, it's cool, but it really, really means nothing in the bigger scheme of things. And you need everyone putting in all their effort to actually implement. That's where the real value comes through.
And what about contracts? I mean, is it when you're young, you know, you're 19, 20, 21, 22, is it just pure excitement that you're launching a venture and everyone just shakes hands and off you go? Or is it important to have contracts in place? Because we've heard of the stories from Facebook and the movies being created of how somebody stitches somebody else up in the future once the wealth starts to come in.
Yeah, we definitely didn't do as much on the legal work upfront as we should have. And I think one of the mistakes that we made when we started off was that we didn't require all of the founders' shares to vest over time. And everyone was allocated their full share from the beginning of the company. And that led to a couple of hiccups along the road, because then when one of the founders wanted to step out, it's now a much harder task to try and claw shares back, as opposed to saying you left before the 5-year vesting period, you only leave with X%. And that's definitely something we should have sought legal advice about at the time. And it's something that I do carefully now with any employee share schemes, that vesting time schedule is key to avoid having to wrangle for shares later on.
Can I ask you, there's two things that happened fairly early in your career. One was being an entrepreneur and building the startup, and then being an intrapreneur. Okay, now there's a lot of people out there who say, what is an intrapreneur? You know, and we all know that when Google started, you know, the first 6-7 employees of Google became multimillionaires. With their shares off the back of being intrapreneurs, which is essentially, you know, somebody else has come up with the idea and created the infrastructure, but then someone leverages that and grows it further. So they've got entrepreneurial traits, but internally within the organization. So when you became chief digital officer, one of the largest companies in Africa, especially South Africa, on the tech side, what insights would you give to someone who's fairly young? Is it best to start a business first when you're young and then go and get some corporate experience? Is it best to go and work with a corporate first and then go and become an entrepreneur? Because you've gone entrepreneur, intrapreneur, entrepreneur.
Exactly. And I don't think that there's necessarily a perfectly right answer. I think there's pros and cons to both. I think starting as an entrepreneur was very beneficial because I never adopted corporate expectations or behaviors. So I kept my lifestyle low and efficient, so that allowed me to experiment and take risks in my business. Whereas most people who take their first job are going to, you know, acquire assets, maybe get married and have kids, and these make it very difficult later on to take these kind of risks. The other big benefit of starting out as an entrepreneur was that I was always accountable to myself. And I recall graduating with a couple of guys who I thought were far more entrepreneurial than I was. But 4 years or 5 years into corporate, their mindset has changed so much. They don't know how to make independent decisions. They don't know how to trust themselves. They haven't got that self-drive or instinct anymore. And I felt that the corporate world had sort of eaten away at that. And that was pretty scary to watch, because I thought they were so much more entrepreneurial than I was. So one has to be careful about that. You've got to protect your mind in a way, so that you don't get stuck in the psyche. But there is a downside to going as an entrepreneur from the outset. One, you don't have a network. So you haven't worked in the industry that you're interested in. Whether I hadn't worked in telecom, so I don't have a relationship with any of the telcos. I don't have a relationship with key suppliers. And that takes much longer to build when you're not inside a corporate structure. And those first 5-6 years where we didn't have any relationships, everything moved so slowly because we didn't have that network. So I think two of the key really key benefits of working into a corporate is, one, getting expertise pretty quickly. Assuming you're in a very high performance culture. Again, if you're not in a high performance culture in a corporate, you're probably not learning enough, and you would learn more in a startup. But secondly, it's the relationships for me that are the most valuable thing that you walk out in a corporate. And even in my short entrepreneurship experience, the amount of relationships and network that you build is significantly greater than an entrepreneur can.
So I love it. I really love it. And I think that the relationships and building your network is a great tip for everyone on doing that. So, but when you built your startup, then you became the chief digital officer of this company. I think the startup story gave you an advantage in the interview process to go, hang on, she's different. You know, she's already started a business. She's going to bring something new to the table. And that gave you the advantage versus just another resume with, you know, got a degree, got a little bit of work
management
experience.
consultant,
Gave you an advantage?
definitely gave me an advantage, and they communicated that exactly. They did indicate that we could have gone for a management consultant with lots of IT and digital experience, but we wanted someone who's done it and built it themselves. And that was a key draw. And on the other side, for me, I was drawn to the idea of being able to build and scale very quickly. I mean, the challenge when you're an entrepreneur in your own small startup, resources are limited. So your capacity to grow is quite constrained. And I was really pulled to the idea of scaling and building businesses really quickly to significant scale. So there was a symbiotic relationship there that allowed us to sort of get things going.
So just expanding on that a little bit more, one of the things you touched on was around university and then the startup. So talking about education now, what are your views on the educational system? And if you take 2020 with the coronavirus, COVID-19, there's many students out there, over 1 billion in the world who've been sat at home doing homeschooling, digital learning. And now there's situations where people are trying to get back, but certain universities are saying maybe in the next term when people start, after the summer, that maybe it's going to be a hybrid model of still online and then certain classrooms will be open. Do you, with your digital experience, do you think this is the time to disrupt the entire education system?
Even the rebel in me, Reg, doesn't believe that we're going to overhaul the entire education system anytime soon. I do think that Corona has positioned a key role for digital learning to play a big part of this learning, but it's still going to be a blended approach for the foreseeable future as much as I can see. I do believe technology has some strengths. So when it comes to knowledge transfer, knowledge acquisition, exposing people to more information, you can do that quicker and in a more personalized way on a digital learning platform. Peer learning to some extent can be done online, but so far we haven't seen a lot of evidence that it's better online versus in person. But thirdly, the biggest category where in-person learning still counts a lot is when you look at experiential learning opportunities that are created when you've got a great teacher or facilitator who can come up with the right simulations or role plays or debates or scenarios that can really immerse people into a valuable experience. And right now, we haven't done a lot of the experiential learning on digital. I do think there's a lot of hope for stuff like augmented reality and virtual reality to fill some of that experiential gap. And we need to invest a lot in those technologies now so that in the next few years, we start to see some of those benefits, which is a key interest area of mine, because I do think we can get something out, but we haven't quite figured it out yet.
So do you think future colleges, universities will remain as brick and mortar institutions?
I think that you will get the top echelon of the universities surviving. But the middle, sort of below 10% or out of the just below the 10% are probably going to struggle significantly because a lot of the digital learning, especially if VR comes into play, will take over a lot of the competitive advantage. And it may not be worth paying those amounts of money for a middle rung sort of university.
So and
you may find that in-person education becomes quite elitist, actually.
So should future generations go to college, university, or just become an entrepreneur and get started?
Sure, I do think it's a personal thing. I think that university gives you some level of confidence, and it's those in-person softer things that you're getting from it. I don't think that you will need to do theoretical training or knowledge acquisition sort of lectures and stuff in a university anymore. And the universities that will exist in the future are going to be more about the peer learning, the co-created learning environments, the experiential learning opportunities. And it's those universities that transition away from knowledge transfer and knowledge acquisition that will sort of maintain their space in society and the world. And that will be worthwhile because relying on real life alone and the opportunities that life presents you to give you all of that requires you to be relatively privileged for it to work out. And I think that universities can still play a part in curating learning experiences there.
So putting college and university to one side, if somebody wants to be a great entrepreneur, a great leader, forget the coursework at college and uni, what are the key skills that you need to make it?
make this work. And it's quite interesting. I've done quite a bit of work with an organization called African Leadership Academy and Africa Leadership Group, and they do a lot of entrepreneurship training in high school and university. So we've discussed a lot how we sort of distill some of those learning principles that you need. But for me, number one is a deep level of self-awareness and self-mastery. And it's not often put in a business context. But as an entrepreneur, you're going to need to self-regulate. You're going to need to inspire and work with others. And you need to be able to manage yourself in a way that you can, pace yourself for the entire marathon and not just the sprint. You need to be able to take a pause and a reflection moment when things happen so that you can reflect and learn and shorten your feedback loop. And these are things that require you to be humble and alert and reflective. And this is why self-awareness and, for me, self-mastery are so key to accelerating your learning curve as an entrepreneur.
Do you think females are better than males in self-awareness?
I think that women invest a lot more time in getting better. There are certainly men that are outstanding at it, but I think the majority of men don't invest as much time into it as women do. That's the perspective I've seen for now.
So men have the potential, but they're just not going there. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't think society incentivizes them to do the work.
No.
It's okay to maybe make a lot of money and be able to look after your family, but women, I think, naturally go into, am I becoming a better person? What happened there? Did I behave correctly? How can I support this person more? And that's that deeper internal work that women somehow get going on, I think, easier. And men are often not congratulated for doing that work. So they're less incentivized to do it.
I think that's a great answer to that question. And with self-awareness, does that link into, some people refer to emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence? Does that link into self-awareness?
Exactly. For me, it links into all of that. I mean, even with emotional intelligence, you need self-awareness to be able to recognize that I reacted a certain way. And why does that incident trigger this feeling inside me? That's a level of self-awareness to even recognize what is triggered inside you. So if you're not even having that self-reflective loop, you can't pause and reflect. You can't choose to make a different response. You can't choose to get better. So it's really quite intertwined.
Yeah, that's great. So outside of self-awareness, self-mastery, what would be some of the other critical skills you feel to become a great entrepreneur, become a great leader?
Yeah, the other key skill is, I would say, the capacity for empathy. Your capacity for empathy plays a role in understanding the client's problem deeply and genuinely caring enough to fix it. And it's not an intellectual exercise so much. But your capacity to really appreciate why a customer is challenged in this situation and what would really make their lives better. So that empathy component will allow you to continuously refine and innovate and recognize when your customer is no longer satisfied and you need to improve things sort of even more. And without that capacity to immerse yourself into what your customer is feeling, you're going to struggle to get to the root of the problem. You're going to probably focus on the superficial, obvious top layer, but you're not going to get to the deeper problem that allows you to get those real competitive advantages out that you can sustain in the long term. So I would say that's number two. And number three, perseverance like no other. I always say that a business takes everything out of you, and once you think it's taken everything out of you, it'll come back for even more. And to be able to outlast is, I think, singularly one of the most important things I've been able to do. I have never been the smartest in the room. I have never been the most well-resourced, but I will be there in 5 years' time. And when most people fall away, and simply the capacity to keep going and be there in that 7 years later determines who the winners can be. Because if you're not there, you can't be among the winners. And that's probably the toughest skill, to be able to go through all the darkness, all the loneliness, all the self-doubt, and to still arrive.
Wow, really good. I could spend another hour asking you questions around skills. You've got a long list, because some of the keynotes that you give, you really focus a lot also, I understand, on innovation, digital transformation and innovation. Maybe could you touch on a few things around that, which is what's required in today's world for the future? where
Yes,
companies need to embrace that, or entrepreneurs, leaders need to embrace what type of things around innovation and digital areas?
sure. So I spend a lot of my time, Reg, trying to make innovation really personal, because I think a lot of us think that unless you're a coder, unless you've got technical training, or you're some super creative, you're not the innovation type. And what I usually say is that innovation stems from reflecting on the things that you're authentically connected to, the things that you first think about in the morning, the things that you think about when you're going for a run, when you've got no pressure and your boss is not telling you to do something. Where does your mind go? And if you're willing to go and unpack that and reflect that, you will start to see the things that you genuinely care about. And those are often the things that you have already got an idea of how to fix or improve. But you just didn't think that this is something sort of worthwhile and unpacking.
Maybe one example.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, for me, before I even went into Rekindle Learning, I realized that I always keep coming back to, how do people learn better? How does the education system improve? How do we get to a point where Africa is uplifted and the economy can actually thrive? For a long time, I just thought it was just something I cared about socially. And until I came to this conclusion for myself that this is actually the area that I'm willing to spend my time and focus on. And when you do that, when you tap into an area that is close to you personally, you're able to see deeper into the problems, and you're closer to having a capacity to come up with the new ways to deal with it. And that's how I started my Rekindle Learning journey. Because of my own high school experience, I would reflect on, we've been given these tests, and every time I see a test script, I promise myself that I will come back and review the answers. And we all know high school is too busy. You never do that. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be easier if something had kept track of the stuff I was struggling with, the stuff I needed to revise, and automatically brought that back to me when it's time again to practice, and I can revise that. And that's really how our first software was designed. It asks you lots of questions, it tracks what you're struggling with, and automatically helps you focus on your weak areas. And that allows you to be coached through that. So I didn't think it was a business idea when I had it at high school, but it stayed with me, and I tuned further and further into it until I could see the business behind it.
So can I ask you then,
yes,
a couple of things coming up. One is, it's almost like being, like you said, it goes back to awareness. And then you're self-aware. Now your external view is just looking at things day to day. That's what you're saying. You're just going, you're just plodding along, and you're looking around, and you suddenly think, hang on, that could be done faster, or that could be done better, or I could solve a problem there. And that sort of seed then could lead to something else. But then there's another area, which is, should you be passionate about solving that problem? Is passion important, or is it just, hey, it's a business idea, let's go? What's your thoughts around the combination?
Sure. I often stay away from the word passion because it sounds very excitable. I think purpose is for me the big thing there. Because the purpose in my life is that I've seen what education can do to change someone's odds in life. I've got cousins and siblings, and I've got aunts and uncles whose life's realities are starkly different from ours. So I truly, truly appreciate what a capacity to learn and get educated can do. And I wanted to be part of making it more democratically available so that that kind of prosperity is not left to chance and winning a lottery. So for me, there's a bigger purpose behind it, and that allows me to keep the focus over years and years. There's passion too, but sometimes I hate coming into work. But there's a purpose behind what I'm doing, and I think that's more important.
So purpose over passion, yeah?
Yeah, for me, it's definitely purpose over passion.
Yeah.
And then the second thing that one needs to think about in that journey, after the self-awareness, is believing that you've got actually the capacity to act on this and make a contribution. And I think this is where most people stop and get lost on the innovation process. And I usually give the example of Dropbox founder, Drew Houston. When he forgot his USB stick at home, he could have thought, I forgot my USB stick at home, I'll submit my assignment another day, oh wow, it's a write-off. But in that frustration, he decided, no man, why can't my files live online? Wow. And that ultimately led to the idea of Dropbox. Whereas most of us, when we get frustrated by something, you let it slide, you move on. you think it's what your life is, and you can't change that. And only when you come to a position where you realize, hang on, this is just one circumstance. I can twist this, I can change it. And you need to have that faith or capacity to believe that you can shift your current reality. And that's the second key part of that innovation. So it's the self-awareness and the belief that you can change a circumstance that allows you to actually start innovating on whatever path that you're on. And most people just don't do that second part because they accept life too easily as what it is.
Wow, that's deep. Like it. I'm just going to bring back the screen share here. I want to ask you, when you discovered that you were, just going back, that was another one.
Yeah, no worries.
Just going back to Forbes Africa, when you found out that you were in the Forbes 30 under 30, what did that feel like?
Sure, I was overwhelmed. I remember that email requesting me to do the cover shoot and cover story. And I replied back to them and I said, I don't think that I am nearly as successful as I need to be to get onto the Forbes cover. Please go pick somebody else because I think that I'm not there yet. And they came back to me and said, we know you're young and up and coming. And this is why we're positioning the established female who's at the end of her career, who's been super successful with who we believe is the up and coming icons of the continent. So don't look at it as we're saying you're a billionaire, because I'm not a billionaire and I felt insecure about that and being on that kind of cover. So eventually they convinced me that it's okay. The article is not about posturing or making me look like I'm richer than I really am, because authenticity is very, important for me. And once we got through that hurdle, then I was quite excited.
Yeah, that's nice. Well, congratulations on that. I know there's many other things that have happened since, and I didn't get a chance to maybe mention them in the introduction.
Sure.
For those of you watching, don't forget to go down to the description area where you can find out more about Rapelang's businesses, Rekindle Learning, and click onto her website regarding her personal bio and learn about some of the topics that she speaks on at major conferences around the world. You saw a glimpse of another image that came up, which is a mutual friend of ours, where I was going to mention his name as well, Jeff Ram, where his episode is also on the channel. You must watch that, all around customer service and what's happening right now as businesses sort of welcome people back. So moving outside of this for a second, with Rekindle Learning, could you just share with us what is Rekindle Learning? What are some of the projects that you're doing, and what is this going to look like in the next 10 years as part of your legacy?
Yeah, so Rekindle Learning is my journey to figure out how we use technology to solve the learning and skills challenge. And I believe it's a lifetime journey. And what that translates into right now is that we provide micro learning experiences. And by that, I mean, instead of giving people long PowerPoints and long training manuals and long face-to-face workshops, we repackage for sales content, compliance, digital skills, whatever that might be, into short videos and interactive questions. So far less reading, which we know people don't actually do and they don't actually enjoy. And the app asks you a whole lot of questions on a topic. It tracks which ones you're getting wrong and helps you reinforce the ones that you're struggling with, and provides you that corrective feedback so that you can master. So it's almost like having a coach. And when I was growing up, my mom was one of those very active moms, and she knew what you were struggling with at school and what you weren't. So she knew what to ask you at home over dinner. And it's kind of like having that kind of mom coach who knows what you're struggling with. So she knows what to help you keep practicing with until you actually demonstrate mastery. And we've helped a number of corporations get through sales enablement, compliance requirements in a much more effective way than they could have before. So one of our banking clients, for example, has a huge regulatory requirement in South Africa for their staff to get a certain exam. And not just people with PhDs were failing, people with just a matric were failing. And using our app, they were able to increase that by 31%, which is a huge jump compared to what they were doing before.
So this is essentially, I'm trying to keep this simple in my mind. This is essentially a platform.
Correct. An app on your phone or your computer.
Love it. And then you would take a problem in a company where there's information requirement or knowledge or learning requirement. And then all of that is then sort of digitized on a platform and given out to people in different channels. Is that right?
Precisely, exactly that. So if you are a sales director and you are launching a new set of products or a new customer service philosophy, as your colleague Jeff does, how do you make sure that everyone around the country has the same message and is communicating the same things to its customers? You can rely on your team managers to communicate, but we know that's unpredictable and is dependent entirely on the person. Or you can make sure they've got micro learning bites that they can do on their own, and you can track the data and the level of interaction to actually make sure that everyone's on the same page.
So you could also check if you've got, let's say, a workforce of 500 people out there doing different things and you're giving them some learning, you would be able to then, is this right? You'll be able to check whether people completed the program or not, or skipped
Precisely, exactly.
Okay.
And not just completed. So old school e-learning just said, it basically just tracks that you went through this 30-page slide deck and you got to the end. That doesn't mean learning actually happened.
That's right.
So because we're much more focused on questions and corrective explanations, you've got to demonstrate that you actually understand, as opposed to I spent an hour on it and now I'm done. You will have to keep learning until you demonstrate mastery. So one of our telco clients, for example, they've got shops around the country. And as a telco operator, you've got new promotions every month, for example. How do you make sure that all your shop sales reps in all the shops know about the new product in time before the customers walk in the store? So this gives them the kind of data that they can use to make sure that their teams are ready to inform the customers of the new product.
Wow. So what is the difference then between Rekindle Learning Platform versus LMS? You know, a lot of people are referring to learning management systems. Is there a difference?
Yeah, it is very different. You're quite right. And I'm glad you picked that up. You're smarter than you look, eh?
Oh, cheers. Yeah, it must be my pink polo shirt. It brings it out.
There you go. So there's definitely a big difference. Learning management systems, or what I refer to as sort of first generation learning platforms, were managing the learning, exactly what the word says. It was checking that all your employees have the qualifications up to date, that they've scheduled their training schedules, plans for the year, that they've attended the training, that the certificates have been issued. So it was about administrating and managing the learning process, and also providing a repository of the information. So you can download the PowerPoint here, you can download the PDF here. So it was a repository, but it wasn't really asking the question, how do I make this information easier to learn and assimilate and for people to demonstrate mastery quicker? So we're really much more focused on the learning tool, the learning efficacy. How can you make it quicker and easier for people to master something and get on with their jobs, basically?
And is this only for corporates, or would this also apply to SMEs or medium family businesses? Could it apply to them, or what they could do? Is there a minimum employee headcount you require to use something like your software?
Sure. So I typically don't recommend it to companies that are smaller than 200 people, just because the cost of rolling out the system may not make sense. And you really see the value and the economies of scale when you are probably at 200 plus employees. We also do work in universities though. So I've worked with 3 universities in South Africa, and they use our platform for their first year students, where they need to do a lot of bridging courses in literacy and numeracy to make sure they're up to standard. You might be aware that in South Africa, we've got a challenge with basic education that is not to the right standard. So people are getting to university without everything they need. So using our app, they can close their gaps a bit quicker.
Wow, love it. Moving on to another area, one of your keynotes that you talk about, I'm intrigued about this one, Neo-Sapiens.
Yes.
Neo-Sapiens, and what's all this about?
Sure. So one of my favorite new keynotes is actually about the role of artificial intelligence. And I know, and I did it because people often have a lot of fear around AI and machine learning and all these things. And I really used the talk to position it as an opportunity for human beings to become even more superhuman beings. And I use the term neo-sapiens to explain that next tier of functionality. And I basically go into how using AI tools, we could be able to feel more. So for example, there's technologies that by simply when someone is talking, and a blind person can be able to get vibrations on their skin or on their cheeks and figure out what someone is saying. So you've got now other senses that you're able to bring into the human body. Right. It can help us see further into the future. So we're now going to be able to predict 5 years in advance before someone has cancer or Alzheimer's or something. So we're now being able to bring our human judgment and capability with the processing power of AI. And that's what's gonna, take us to the next level of being neo-sapiens, is essentially what I'm saying.
So if we now fast forward to 2030, okay, actually, let's go 2040, okay?
2040, sure.
20 years into the future. And, what will still be around as normal part of our life today, which will still be there? What would you think has evolved, and what will become obsolete? It's extinct.
2040. Sure. Okay, so I think some of the things that will have evolved substantially is probably how we move around, transport and logistics. I think, as human beings right now, we invest a lot of energy in sitting in traffic and moving around. And I think those things through self-driving and better scheduled sort of driving times for public transport are going to become a thing of the past, I hope, by 2040. And moving cargo around as well. We're going to get a whole lot smarter about that. So that's one of the things I look forward to. I think on the learning and skill side, which is one of my favorite areas, we're going to see a lot of change in how quickly we can learn something. I think we're going to get very good at understanding what you need to trigger in the brain for someone to learn something emotively or cognitively and master it quicker. So you might be able to, put on a VR headset and go through a mindfulness journey and remove anxiety, for example, and by simply knowing what parts of the brain to stimulate. I think the things that are probably going to stay the same are childcare and looking after a baby to a large extent, having meals around the table with your family and spending time there. And teaching kids to read. I think that might still be the same, but supplemented with an app, of course. Yeah.
So outside of the app, there's not going to be, Sheila the robot who's going to be, just roaming around in the house and maybe teaching your kids.
They probably will. They actually, you're probably right. They could be. I just maybe imagine that we're still going to read kids bedtime stories in a way. And that part may still need that human emotional element for someone to get ready for sleep.
So are you excited about that future, or are you nervous? Are you a bit scared? What do you think?
I can't say that I'm scared about the future. I believe that our worlds always change, and being in the midst of change makes you feel uncomfortable at times. But we always learn and readjust and create a new normal. And COVID has certainly showed us that. It's horror and pain for the first 2 weeks. And then you've got to rebalance and find a way to make it work. So with every industrial revolution, we've seen that dramatic change. And I think with this one, it's going to cause change, but we will find a new normal.
Love it. Finally, inspiring more women, to become entrepreneurs and get into leadership roles from where we started in this interview today. What could you add to that to inspire? First of all, let's think about young females. I've got 4 children. I've got 3 boys and a girl. My daughter is 19. She's currently an entrepreneur. She runs an e-commerce fashion brand with her brother, who's 22 years of age. And she's had no real commercial experience because she hated, out of our 4 kids, she's the one who absolutely had a bad experience with the educational system. She really hated it. And then decided to get into entrepreneurship. And now she started a course. So she left education, started a business, and thought, I'd like to upskill myself further. And is now on a fashion diploma with an institution part-time. Youngest in the entire class.
Oh, wow.
And has already been top in 2 assignments.
Fantastic. Wow, so she's found her niche.
One with a judging panel where they had to pitch a new business idea. And she's recently been approached by one of them to work for them. Now, what advice would you give to someone like that who is already started an entrepreneurial journey, studying part-time, suddenly
Yes.
got attention from a corporate who sees something in her and is pitching her, a bit like you being an entrepreneur, then suddenly you going into the corporate world.
Correct, yes.
What advice would you give her with your experience today, Rapelang? What would you say?
Sure. She sounds like she's on track, hey? I don't think she needs any advice. But what I would add for her is that she's done very well at this point to keep navigating through the uncomfortable until she found the things that resonated with her. And this for me is a key part of the journey as women, because I think we can become withdrawn or detached from the options available to us because they don't resonate, because it doesn't feel like this is what we should be doing. And we must bear in mind that the world was structurally not built or designed for us. So finding that niche or finding those things that resonate will take a bit more effort and may require you to be more unconventional, like your daughter is doing. But it is not to say that there isn't a space where you can't thrive. And if you can't find the space, then create it by being an entrepreneur. You don't have to take sort of what life has thrown at you. And we must just bear in mind that the world wasn't created with us in mind. So don't expect it to affirm you. You've got to give yourself your own self-affirmation and be willing to search and or create what ultimately serves you.
Lovely. Well, I'll make sure that she watches this. Now, you just said something there which is very deep.
Yes.
The world was not, what did you say? The world is not designed for
Certainly not designed for young Black women. It wasn't structurally designed to affirm young Black women. It's not like I grew up watching, none of my teachers were Black at university, and mostly women, but none of them were Black. Certainly in computer science, all my teachers were male and white. So these were not things that were affirming of me subconsciously. So one must be aware of that in the back of your psyche and realize that in the absence of the world, being able to affirm you, you've got to do that work for yourself because the world isn't going to give it to you.
But do you think, regardless of the circumstances or the environment,
yes,
a lot of it is to do with your mindset and your attitudes? For example, I started my first company when I was 17.
Yeah.
And my mindset was, I'm so young, everyone's going to help me.
Very good mindset.
It wasn't about this British Indian kid going to see companies and corporates being scared to go, you know what, no one will ever buy from me. It was more about, hey, I'm young, I'm sure they'll help me.
Yes.
And I was naive at the time, but that
that
was my blueprint and mindset that allowed me to get through that.
Exactly.
And be successful and meet the right people. So do you think that's partly?
It's definitely a key thing because my mindset was, I don't know what I'm doing, but I've got a lifetime to figure it out. So we've got to figure it out eventually. Yeah. And I was okay with being able to go on that journey. It wasn't, and that was the mindset that definitely helped me. Whereas I think a lot of other people were like, how could you do that? You don't know what you're doing. And I was like, it's okay. I've got 80 years of my life to figure this out. So let's keep going. And I think the story you tell yourself is just so, so key. And you told yourself a story that people will help you. I told myself a story that I may not know it, but I'll figure it out. And you've got to be so careful about that story you tell yourself.
What do you mean by that?
So I'm saying the story you told yourself was that when I start a business, people will help me. So that's a story you told yourself about how life works. Yes. The story I told myself about how life works is, even if you don't know what you're doing, if you keep trying and practicing, eventually you'll figure it out. And that's the story I told myself that allowed me to take it.
What you're saying is to be careful with the story you tell yourself, because if it's a negative story,
correct, yeah, they will cripple you.
You've already created more problems for yourself.
100%. So if you believe that you can't start a business because you'll fail, or you can't start a business because no one will help you, that's the story you've told yourself, and that'll trap you.
That's brilliant. And future in organizations, do you see more women becoming leaders and taking, like you had a C-level position? Do you see more women getting into that C-suite leadership role?
Reg, I think that the corporate world is full of lots of rubbish and women are less likely to tolerate it. I think that we need to create new types of organizations and companies that affirm who we are and demonstrate the behaviors and values that you have and believe in. And I don't know that corporates, in the way they're going now, even in South Africa, are going in that direction. There's a lot of nonsense going on there. And part of me is that I don't know that women are willing to tolerate it, which is why they don't stick around.
Wow, that's deep. So what we're saying is that there's a lot of rubbish there, and therefore women won't tolerate, they'll become entrepreneurs instead. But back to what you said about the new type of organization, okay? What could that look like?
I think it's the kind of organization that is driven by, the concept of servant leadership, collaboration, and transparency and communication. So for example, when I hire someone, they're always quite surprised by how transparent everything is. You've got the entire communications of what the team has been talking about for the last year on Slack or something. You've got the entire folder of all the documents and proposals we've ever created. You've got the profit and loss and our targets for this year. And I don't come to meetings with, show me what you've done and whether it's right or wrong. It's, what are we going to fix together in this meeting? And it's a very different approach to what I think people experience in the corporate world, which is why, the entrepreneurship environment, or the one I certainly create, is a lot more appealing to people, because it's less about you and them, but us creating and doing stuff we think is important. And I don't know that enough people feel that in a corporate context.
So looking at my list here of the 37, I'm going on like Fortune 500, 37 seats. I'm wondering what these women will do differently in a corporate world. So Mary, Bara, General Motors. I mean, they're 18th on the list in the Fortune 500. Imagine running a company like that. You've got Best Buy, Corey Barry for Best Buy. You've got Safra, who's a senior position at Oracle. And I'm just wondering, looking at some of these brands on the list, how will women in those leadership roles as CEOs of multi-billion-dollar corporations, how will they change that workforce? What will they do differently than typically the male leadership style?
Sure. I mean, two things on that. The first is that I don't believe that one person can change. You actually need a critical mass, and that's more around 30% of the organization starting to shift. So one woman in a group of 10 is actually not that strongly empowered, but 3 or 4 women in a group of 10, you actually start to feel the shift. And it's the same way in innovation. If you've got 10 people and 9 of them are old school and 1 innovator, they're just going to be making noise. You're not going to create a critical mass and shift. And once you have that critical mass and shift, what I think you will see more in corporates is more honest conversations, what's really going on, less posturing, less needing to look good and feel good at all times, and just getting to the issue at hand. More reaching out a hand to how do we support and grow this team and create a space for them that allows them to thrive. Conversations around that, as opposed to, I need to be the one that looks great from this project. How do I make sure I get the credit and get my bonus from this? And that kind of shift for facilitating an environment that creates value and empowers people to perform at that peak, I think will be a key part of the conversation for me. And that's because that's how I kind of see the world. I don't see myself as a CEO who has to solve all the company's problems. I see myself as someone who needs to make sure that every day I have removed as many of the barriers as possible for my team to thrive. And then that's my real job, I think.
I think it's great. I think the way you've just said it it's inspirational almost to a point where it's like, let me go and work for an organization where a woman is the CEO. That's what it sounds like. But if you have to get to critical mass and to make that shift, and I'm going to be slightly controversial, and I'm not saying it in a wrong way, I'm just, because it's in my mind, and I've heard people talk about this, is with more women in the organization, and I'm not being sexist in any way, but it's just putting it out there and getting your opinion. Is there more drama or less drama?
I think if it's 100% women team, there will be lots of drama, and diversity is required both ways. All women teams are not fabulous either. All male teams are not fabulous. And I find that you do need men in the room to sometimes not not take things as seriously, perhaps on an emotional level sometimes, and you do need that mix. We've got to watch for that diversity shift. We can't go to the extreme end now. We've got to mix things up.
Great answer. So just to conclude, before we wrap up, and again, for those of you who enjoyed listening to Rapelang, make sure you hit the subscribe button for other great content, but also leave some comments for her. Maybe go down to the description area and go to the website for Rekindle, also a personal website, and look at a profile. So just to really conclude, for the future, what's important to you? Is it to build your company into a global business? Is it to exit? Is it to do other things in the future? What does your future entrepreneurial journey look like in your mind?
Sure. I want to build Rekindle Learning into a force on the African continent. That's really my main focus. So that in 10 years' time, we know much more clearly how do we close knowledge gaps, how do we capacitate people to perform, so that it's less left to chance and more people can get through and not fall through the cracks. That's something that I think will take most of my life, truly. The second thing that I'll probably want to unpack and get involved in later on is how we scale up and finance startups and SMEs. So venture capital is still very underdeveloped on the continent, and where there is some venture capital, it's not run or driven by entrepreneurs or second or third generation entrepreneurs. And I think that's a huge disadvantage. So I definitely want to play a role in creating that ecosystem, so that entrepreneurs like me 15 years ago don't have as horrible a time as I did at the beginning.
And look forward to supporting you with your journey. Great to be connected with each other and build a trusted relationship for the future. I hope everyone's enjoyed watching you, listening to you, and I really want to thank you for your time today. And hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Awesome to be on your platform. And
well, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day in South Africa. Stay safe and be prosperous, and we'll catch up again soon. Thank you so much.
Cheers.